There we go. Everybody joining me on the show right now is Chris Gordy. You can hear him on Locked On SEC every single day, and also Sports Talk 790 in Houston. And Chris, I appreciate you coming on the show and talking SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. Any chance we get to talk football, it's always a good time, and that's what's so fun with the SEC Media Days is, I think my buddy Matt Moscona describes it as, any week in July we can just take out and talk college football the entire week. It's a good week because not only does it mean we're getting closer to the season, but it's better than the alternative. I mean, I love MLB, and but talking Major League Baseball for an entire week in July, yeah, if I could talk college football instead, I'll take that one.
Yeah, it's always a fun week. I know, of course, Steve Spurrier always called it the talking season. We're doing all that. Being in Nashville, how was it? They're a different location being up there in Nashville this time.
Yeah, it's cool. The SEC's done a really good job. Obviously, this is an event that has been in Hoover, Alabama for so many years, and I started going about a decade ago. And I remember first year I went, it was right around the Manziel time when A&M and Missouri came to the conference, and I want to say then there was around 15 to 20 radio stations on Radio Row, as they call it. The big media room's always been pretty big with TV stations and writers from all across the South. But, just in the past decade, what I've seen from the Radio Row, I mean, this year I want to say there was 40 to 50 radio stations, with podcasters included now, even more TV stations, even more writers, bloggers, all this kind of stuff. And so it's gotten such that it's such a big event now. I don't know if they can ever go back to the Winfrey Hotel in Hoover. I know they did it, the year right after COVID, but they did Atlanta a couple years ago. They did a return trip to Atlanta last year, and there were rumors that Nashville was on the docket, and then ultimately they landed it. Well, then last year, I remember hearing rumors that Dallas might be an option, and so this year they announced Dallas next year. So I think they're going to keep moving this thing around to the biggest sites that they can. And, who knows? Talking with some people, they said New Orleans could be on the table. There's plenty of options. I almost think they'd put a bid out. I mean, why not? Jacksonville, let's get some bigger cities into the mix and see Memphis maybe, because it's such a big event. And Nashville did a fantastic job of hosting it. Only problem with the Grand Hyatt Nashville where it was they have road construction going right. It's right on Broadway, right before what's normally a bridge. Well, that entire bridge is being rebuilt, and so they had an entire street blocked off. And so to get into the hotel, I mean, it was pretty tough. Even Uber drivers, like if you want to get around town, they couldn't even figure it out. There was a big blockade like right outside the street where the hotel was. So that was a little frustrating, but just being able to walk around the city and stuff like that was really cool. Nashville's a great city, and having everything centrally located in the hotel. It was such a big hotel that hosts a lot of conferences and stuff like that. They really had the right setup, and it was kind of broken up over a couple floors, but almost everything was on that second floor, from Radio Row to the big main media room to the electronic media room. You really didn't have to leave that floor unless, for meals and stuff like that. So, great setup. I think a lot of people I talked to, complimented them on that setup. And I think we'll have probably a similar type setup in Dallas next year. But for those folks who are old school and love the old Winfrey Hotel in Hoover, I don't know if it's ever going back there because, like I said, this thing has gotten way bigger. And now adding Texas and Oklahoma starting next year, there ain't no looking back. It's not like it's going to get smaller. It's not like less people are going to have interest in SEC. So, yeah, it's cool to see how big it's grown, and it continues to grow.
Yeah, I know. For you, selfishly, you got to be kind of happy it's going to be in Dallas next year. It'll be a little bit closer to where you're at.
Yeah, it's funny. We used to, for the early years, we used to drive over to Hoover, and then we got smarter and would fly into Birmingham, and then flew into Atlanta, flew into Nashville. But the advantage of it being in Dallas, living in Houston where I am, is we can drive. It's only a couple hours, and we can bring way more equipment. That's the hard part. When you fly, you can't bring as much. You got to pack everything tight. Driving, I mean, you can bring every banner, tablecloth, signage, everything you want up there. So that'll be a little bit of an advantage. But yeah, I'm also curious to see how people react because, I have some friends who are diehard Big 12 fans, and this is a straight up, gang war basically. So saying, hey, we're coming into your territory. We're invading your turf for this thing. And by the way, our thing is bigger and better than yours. So Yeah, we saw it at Big 12 Media Days 2 weeks ago. There were some fighting words being thrown around there, taking shots at Texas and Oklahoma on the way out the door. Yeah, there's going to be some big shots next year with the Big 12 having shots at the SEC coming to their town to do SEC Media Days.
Yeah, what was it? The deputy commissioner of the Big 12 said that Texas and Oklahoma Texas just got tired of getting beat by Kansas State, and now they can just get beat by Alabama. So I think that was the
Yeah,
quote.
it's
It's
not a
just
crazy quote. I mean, yeah, we're trying to improve our resume. If we're going to get beat by somebody, I'd rather get beat by Alabama than Iowa State. So yeah, it's like everybody thought that was a shot. I'm like, it makes sense to me. Like, yeah, I get what he's saying is Texas is going to lose games no matter what. So why not lose to better competition? But if I'm Texas, I go, damn right. Yeah, if I lose 2 games to Alabama and Georgia, guess what? I'm getting in the playoff as a 10-2 team with 2 great resume losses.
yeah. How much do you think the Big 12 would hate it if Texas won the Big 12 in their final year
Oh,
going out?
I am rooting for Texas and Oklahoma to not run the table, but I'm hoping they both represent in the Big 12 title game, and I hope Texas wins the trophy and the commissioner has to hand it to him, and I hope Sark just stares at him while he hands it to him. And then what I would do if it was I'm Sark, I would hold it up for a second, then I would put it on the ground and walk away and go, I'm off to the SEC, bigger and better things. See you guys. Like I think that would be a total slap in the face. But yeah, just for Brett Yormark to have to hand Sark that trophy this year, I'm rooting like hell for that because he took a shot. Was like Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, they didn't even play for our championship last year or in recent years. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's act like TCU is going to take over college football here for the next decade. Stop.
Yeah, you're losing your 2 big your big names, your 2 big money makers. That it doesn't matter what their record is. I mean, they're always going to be top of the conversation with them. But over the last week, SEC Media Days, I know it's a very broad question, but what was probably the biggest highlight for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. In recent years, we've had such big storylines. Like coming out of COVID, how the path to football, and then not too long after that, NIL becomes a thing. Conference expansion becomes a thing. Of course, a couple years ago was when the news broke that Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the conference. All these big storylines, and yet this year there was really no storyline. I mean,
Mhm.
it was very interesting. It was very quiet among the coaches, and be real, a lot of the coaches have gotten smart with this thing. They know to go there and not ruffle any feathers, not take any shots, go be diplomatic, get in, get out. And I was really surprised. I mean, I guess the biggest thing we heard was Lane Kiffin saying that state of college football is a disaster when it comes to the transfer portal and NIL and all that. But that was really the only big headline. I mean, everything else was kind of just talking about their teams. And one thing I did notice, just kind of talking to a lot of the media that cover folks in all the different cities, radio hosts, TV personalities, all that, is that everybody's optimistic. Like, it's weird because there's always a year like when you feel like your coach is on the hot seat, or you go there and go, hey man, pressure's on, he's got to win this year. I remember Ed Ogeron's last year at LSU being at SEC Media Days. The attitude was, well, this guy's got to win, or he could be gone. And it really didn't hear that much from anybody. I mean, even the Texas A&M faithful were saying, we think Jimbo's safe. Like, the buyout is so much, even if he has a 6-6 year, we don't think he's going to be fired because the buyout is still so large. So I just thought that was very interesting how everybody thinks they're going to be good. And it's like I always say, man, like, someone has to suck. Like, not everybody can be good. Like, if you're going to have a conference, someone has to lose, and it can't just be Vanderbilt. Somebody has to come in last place. It was funny. I was doing my ballot, and I kept going back and forth, and ultimately I landed Auburn at 7th in the SEC West, dead last. Now, I still have Auburn going 6-6 this year. I think they'll make a bowl game, and I think the future is bright. I think the arrow's pointed upward with Hugh Freeze. But, the media voted Mississippi State last, but I keep looking at that roster and going, man, Will Rogers, Jaquavius Marks, Tulu Griffin, all the guys in that defense, Jed Johnson. I'm like, there's too much talent on that roster to say Mississippi State's going to go 5-7. Like, they're going to win some games. And so it's funny, some Auburn fans were in my DM saying, oh, how you pick us last? I'm like, well, guys, like, look at everybody else. Like, you think Ole Miss is going to finish last? You think, A&M, I don't think they're going to finish last. The media picked them 3rd in the West. They think they're going to bounce back with Jimbo hiring Bobby Petrino. And so, yeah, it becomes tough. Like, someone has to be last, but nobody wants to be last. In the East, it's Vanderbilt, probably going to be Missouri just ahead of them. But I'm optimistic on Tennessee and Kentucky. Obviously, Georgia is the king right now. And then in the West, I think it's kind of a battle between LSU and Alabama. It was pretty split all week long. Majority of the media members I talked to said they think LSU's, or they were going to pick LSU to win the West. And yet I think when most people got down to it and filled out their ballot, they said, you know what, the game's in Tuscaloosa. I guess I'll default to Alabama because I can't see Nick Saban having, two straight 2-loss seasons. So, yeah, it's just kind of interesting that, my big takeaway just being there last week was how positive everybody is. And look, there's some great quarterbacks in this league. I heard somebody say they think this is a down year for quarterbacks in the conference. I disagree. I think it's going to be a really strong year for quarterbacks. Now there's some unknowns. I think Carson Beck at Georgia is going to be one of those guys that hits us all in the face this year and hits the scene big time. And we go, wow, we thought Stetson Bennett was a good story. Carson Beck is even better. He's more talented than Stetson Bennett ever was. Bigger arm, and he's got more weapons now. He brings in Dominic Lovett, who was Missouri's leading receiver a year ago. They bring in Rara Thomas, one of Mississippi State's leading receivers a year ago, and you've got all the pieces that are already there with Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers and all that. I think Carson Beck is gonna hit the scene and be among the league leaders in passing this year. So you look at him, Joe Milton, obviously Tennessee, everybody's excited about. Jaden Daniels coming back at LSU, KJ Jefferson back at Arkansas, Devin Leary transfers from NC State into Kentucky. I just think there's a lot of good quarterbacks in this conference this year. Now, it's on a lot of them to step up and rise to the occasion, but I think they will. And I think at the end of this year, we're going to look back and go, man, this was actually one of the better years of quarterbacks in the SEC.
Yeah, I noticed no Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson or Jalen Monroe when you listed that off, and that's been my biggest thing about Alabama going into this year. And I'll be honest with you, for me, I think my prediction is LSU wins the West because I have too many questions with Alabama at quarterback and wide receiver. Wide receiver is another thing I have questions with. But Nick, you talked about positive and optimistic. Nick Saban kind of seemed to, sometimes with these things feel like Nick Saban's got a point to get across. It didn't really feel like that when he spoke to the media last week on Wednesday. What did you make of Nick Saban at media days?
I think he feels good about his group. He's got a good team. Let's be real. They've still, as much as we want to talk about Georgia, and, remember 2 years ago, all the stink A&M signed the best recruiting class and all this. Nick Saban's been right there, and he just had one of his best recruiting classes he's ever signed. And so there's a lot of 4- and 5-star talent up and down the roster. It's just all about it clicking. You could convince me right now, and I was thinking about this, when I was filling out the ballot, yeah, Alabama's got some quarterback questions right now. I know a lot of people are picking Texas to beat Alabama in week 2. I know they got to go into Tuscaloosa and do it, but Quinn Ewers, frankly, before he got hurt in that game last year, it was looking like Texas was going to give Alabama everything they could handle, and they needed a miracle run from Bryce Young in the final minute of that game to pull that game out last year. I think even if Alabama loses to Texas in week 2, everybody's going to dismiss them and all that, but what's going to happen? They're going to develop chemistry. This team's going to get better as the year goes along. And by the time we get to November and they play host to LSU, who knows what LSU looks like at that point? They could have a bunch of injuries, and maybe Alabama's riding high and they've got everything figured out. So many people I talk to are high on Jace McClellan at running back. They think he's going to be one of the best. And then, of course, Justice Haynes, the true freshman coming in, really turned some heads in the spring. And so people are excited about that. It sounds like Tommy Rees is going to get back to the ground and pound dominant run game that we're so used to Alabama doing. One of the most fascinating stats last year was Alabama, when they ran the ball, were very effective. Just Bill O'Brien didn't call a ton of run plays because they had Bryce Young at the helm and they wanted to put the Heisman Trophy winners, passing on display and all that. I honestly thought the offensive line wasn't very good for Alabama last year. They've made some adjustments. They've added some pieces. I think this group is ready to go this year. And obviously J.C. Latham is the big guy that anchors the bunch. I think the offensive line, if they can be bulldozers and pushing people back and that run game's going, and then on the flip side, Kevin Steele's got that defense aggressive. I interviewed Dallas Turner last week. I said, it looked like you guys were more aggressive in the spring. At least in the spring game, we were seeing more of those exotic blitzes of safeties coming into the box, corners coming off the edge, that we become so accustomed to with Nick Saban-led Alabama defenses. And he said, yeah, we kind of had that a little bit. We have a chip on our shoulder, and we want to show everybody we can be that aggressive attacking style of defense again. And so If Alabama does that, if they're the ground and pound offense and the defense is aggressive and blitzing and in people's face all the time, I don't know if what the quarterback does is going to matter much. And that reminds me of those Bama teams from a decade ago
Mm-hmm.
where, it was plug and play. Whoever is, is it Blake Sims or is it Jacob Coker, whoever, just go in there and don't mess it up. That's where I think, a Milrow or a Buckner or Simpson, it doesn't matter how, good you are. Just go in there and do the job and let's get the win. All that said, whoever does win the job, and I've watched a little Buckner. I don't, it doesn't excite me a whole bunch. But Jalen Milrow is like, his running ability is
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. I even think if he's not the starting quarterback, I feel like they have to have some kind of packages for him, maybe at least in the red zone. Put him in as a runner because he's ridiculous as a runner. Make those defenses have to respect him. His arm's decent enough. But talking with Greg McElroy and some others last week, they think that Ty Simpson right now is in the driver's seat. And again, Ty Simpson made some nice throws in the spring game. He made some bad ones. It was a mixed bag. But I think at the end of the day, whoever wins that job, let's not act like it's going to be AJ Swan at Vandy. Like, whoever wins that job is going to be a really good quarterback. And, even if they're just middle of the pack in the SEC this year, are going to be very productive and win a lot of games here at Alabama this year. So, yeah, that was kind of just my thought is, LSU has a lot of the questions answered coming into the season, and that's why I think a lot of people are picking them to win the West. But by the time we get to that game in November, if Alabama's answered all those questions and they can win that game at home, they're in the driver's seat to win the SEC West. It's almost like LSU last year, right? When LSU won that game against Bama, they were in the driver's seat. They slipped up and lost to Texas A&M a few weeks later, and it didn't matter. They already had the head-to-head with Bama. And so that's where I look at that game and say, yeah, Nick Saban, is he going to go undefeated this year? No. Bama's not going to go undefeated. They're going to lose a game, maybe two, but all depends on what those losses are. If they lose to Tennessee, if they lose to Texas early in the year, and let's say they lose to Tennessee again. I know no Bama fan wants to even envision that, but let's just say those are their two losses, but they beat LSU. Guess what? Bama's going to the SEC championship to play likely Georgia, and if they win that game, Bama's back in the playoff again with two losses. It'd be the first two-loss team to make the playoff this year. So anyway, that's just kind of my general thought on Bama. Like, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. It's not as great. It's not sunshine and roses. It's not undefeated season, but I'm also not burying them like a lot of people are right now.
Yeah, which Lane Kiffin talked about that. Paul Feinbaum does that every year and then makes them mad. And the rest of the coaches are like, thanks, Paul. Thanks for making them mad. Okay, in a joking sense, though, but I do want to ask you about Lane Kiffin. So that was one of the funnier things at the end of his with the doppelganger, the guy that asked if, he thinks he looked like him. And so, Chris, I'm going to tell you a little thing about that. That reporter is from down here where I'm at, Nick Brooks, and that has happened. But overall with Lane Kiffin, like you talked about earlier, the disaster, talking about transfer portal and all those stuff. But it seemed like Lane too also was coming in with the comedy side of it at media days.
Yeah, it's funny. He's got such a great personality. Yet when he gets on these big stages in front of microphones, he kind of clamps up a little. Like, if you compare Lane in person behind a microphone versus Lane on social media, he's so much more outspoken and taking shots at people and all this kind of stuff. I wish we could get more of Twitter Lane, in press conferences and stuff. Because, look, he could go to SEC Media Days and be the modern day Spurrier if he really wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't spell citrus without UT. Like, he could take jabs like that all day at other teams. The problem is, I think he realizes there's a ceiling at Ole Miss. Like, unfortunately, like, the best I think Lane will ever do at Ole Miss, and if he stays there for years to come, is maybe he does what Tennessee just did. You get to a 10-win season where you go to a New Year's Six bowl, and and we saw that a couple years ago, right? He went to the Sugar Bowl and did that. I just think that that's like the ceiling. I don't know if he could ever play for a championship. Now, the playoff expanding maybe does change that, but I think that's why Lane's got the wandering eye. I think that's why he flirted with Auburn so heavily this offseason. And honestly, it's just like, what's the next big thing to come along? Like, let's say Ryan Day loses to Michigan again and Ohio State decides to can him in a year. You don't think Lane's going to be throwing his name in a hat there? There's been long rumors that, once Saban does retire, that Lane wants to throw his name in the hat for the Alabama gig. I've heard some people say maybe he wouldn't. It's too much pressure. But Lane's always got that wandering eye and always looking for the next big thing, because I think he just realizes that there's a ceiling at Ole Miss that you can be good, but winning a national championship, it just doesn't seem doable, at least with the resources he has. Now, he did a great job of getting a lot of Ole Miss boosters to open up their checkbooks and write money and improve the NIL and all that. And he's done a great job of recruiting. But I just wonder, is he ever going to settle in there? Is he ever going to be, because Ole Miss fans are split. A lot of them that I talked to after the bowl game in Houston, they were kind of like, yeah, look, Lane's our guy. He's committed. Let's lock in. And there were others who were like, no, he lost me with this whole flirting with Auburn thing. And, the reporter that put it out there, it's done deal. Lane Kiffin's going to Auburn. I don't know if it was a done deal, but I do think they were pretty far down the road in discussions of him going to Auburn, and whatever happened, happened where he didn't leave. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because I think he's got a great roster. I mean, Quinshon Judkins is a stud. Whoever wins the quarterback job, it sounds like it's going to be Jackson Dart at this point. I don't know why Spencer Sanders even went there, because I've been told Walker Howard is going to be the backup no matter what happens this year. They got some good receivers like they always do. The defense has a lot of work to do. Pete Golding's going to have his work cut out for him this year. They're doing a good job recruiting. Once they get the kids in the 2024 class in, I think he'll really start to be able to build his system how he wants it. So you got to give the defense a pass this year. But I think it's a little over-exaggerated, Lane's comments, though, on saying that college football is a disaster right now. I don't think it is. I mean, the people who are saying that are the ones who are losing maybe recruits to other schools, or losing guys to the transfer portal or whatever. But Lane's done his own, good work in acquiring guys via the transfer portal. So I don't think it's a disaster. There were some things to clean up. It's not perfect, but how many instances of the transfer portal not working have we had? How many instances of, there's been a couple of guarantees to kids for NIL that didn't come through, but those are few and far between. There's a lot more kids that have taken advantage and gotten paid and are doing great with it. I had somebody tell me the other day, so how many complaints have you heard really from kids saying, man, NIL sucks? Barely any of them. They're all enjoying being able to make a little money. Now, again, we can get into it on the 5-star recruiter who was guaranteed $7 million and didn't get it or whatever. Yeah, those are the extremes. But I took Greg Sankey to task on that. He was saying, oh yeah, I have kids come to me all the time and say, we got to fix this. I'm like, bull. I doubt there are any current SEC football players going to Greg Sankey and going, Commissioner, this is crazy. My teammate made $1 million in NIL. This is craziness. We need to end this. Like, no kid is saying that. That's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. He don't say it anywhere. I know if I was 18, 20-year-old back then, if someone was asking me, giving me money like that, I said I wouldn't be complaining about it, but not one bit. Real quick, if you don't mind, I got one more question for you. I'll let you go. No, we've gone a few minutes over than what I told you. Just the SEC East. We didn't really get into them much there. Obviously, Georgia's the favorite, and Tennessee coming in at second. Do you see anybody else in the East that maybe potentially could give Georgia some trouble, or do you think it's just kind of going to be like a cakewalk on that side?
Tennessee's interesting because they get them at home late in the year, Georgia, that is. So, look, a lot of people are very high on Joe Milton. I was at the Manning Passing Academy a few weeks ago. I saw Milton firsthand. He can chuck it 80 yards just by flicking his wrist. I mean, it's ridiculous, the arm he has. The big gripe on him has been touch. He needs more touch. We saw in the Vanderbilt game and then the bowl game against Clemson that it looks like he's worked on that with Josh Heupel. And so if he spent all this offseason working on that, he could throw an accurate ball, put some touch on it. He's going to be just fine there. And, people will be saying Hendon Hooker who? Okay, Joe Milton just picked up right where Hendon Hooker left off, and they're going to be fine. Love their receivers, love their running backs. Defense, I think, still needs to get a little bit better on that side of the ball, and Josh Heupel has said as much. But I think Tennessee is that team that could surprise. In fact, somebody I talked to last week said, yeah, everybody's picking, Georgia and Alabama. I've got Tennessee and LSU in Atlanta. I said, sign me up for that. I'm for anything different from what, the same damn thing we've seen every other year, it feels like. But Tennessee's definitely the one to watch. The other one in my mind is Kentucky. They've done a fantastic job of recruiting. They hit the transfer portal. He loses, Mark Stoops loses Will Levis at quarterback and Chris Rodriguez at running back. He replaces him with Devin Leary, the top quarterback who in the transfer portal everybody wanted out of NC State. and then they go get Ray Davis, a running back from Vanderbilt, but you say, oh, running back from Vanderbilt, who cares? But he was the top 5 rusher in the SEC last year. He was very productive. Combine that with the receiving core of Tavion Robinson coming back with their 2 dynamic freshmen a year ago in Berrien Brown and Dane Key. I think Kentucky's got one of the best receiving cores in the SEC this year. Offensive line, they've retooled it a little bit, brought in some pieces. The left tackle, Marquez Cox, came over from Northern Illinois. He's still got Eli Cox there. Like, they got some real good pieces on that offensive line. If the defense is going to be good, J.J. Weaver's back for his 5th year. I think Kentucky could be that team that makes some noise. Now, I think they got to go to Athens, so a little bit tougher. But go look at the last 3 years, what that Kentucky defense has done to Georgia's offense. Georgia's been lighting up everybody except Kentucky. Kentucky's defense has done a great job of forcing Georgia to settle for field goals rather than touchdowns in the last couple of matchups. Now, again, Kentucky's got to answer on the other side. Their offense hasn't done much of anything. But, you know, if you go back and look at Georgia last year, one of the few teams that gave them a tough test, Missouri and Kentucky. Kentucky's defense really stymied Georgia's offense in that game. And so, again, outside shot, I don't know if I'm going to pick Kentucky to go in Athens and win, but they can give them a game. And who knows, get a lucky break, a pick 6, a fumble here or there, and maybe Kentucky can win that game and maybe put themselves in the mix. And then the other one I'll just throw in there is South Carolina. Look, I still have major questions about their offensive line, but you have Spencer Rattler back. You have Juice Wells back at receiver. Nicholas Harbor, I'm told, is like, that's the kid you got to watch. There's a top 20 recruit, ended up at South Carolina. It sounds like they're going to play him a little at tight end, maybe line up at wideout, move him around. He's a weapon. If they can protect Spencer Rattler like they did later in the season last year, because he got killed right out of the gates last year. Like, I was watching South Carolina. I'm like, oh, my God, like, somebody protect Spencer Rattler. He's getting murdered out there.
Yeah, he was.
Season, that Tennessee game, the Clemson game, and then even the bowl game against Notre Dame, they did a much better job of protecting him. And what did we see? Upset wins over Tennessee, over Clemson, and they nearly pulled it out over Notre Dame in the bowl game. South Carolina is just that danger team, and Shane Beamer's done a great job of recruiting there. So just a team to watch there. And then lastly, I'll give you Florida over-under win total I saw in Vegas last week was 5.5. Please take the over. If Billy Napier can't win 6 games at Florida, we got bigger problems in the swamp. Like, you are a proud Florida Gators program that was winning championships under Spurrier and Urban Meyer. If you can't get to 6-6, then you don't deserve to play football in the swamp. Like, find a way to 6 wins. I think Florida gets there. They're recruiting great. Billy Napier's done a great job. That 2024 recruiting class, I think, is already in the top 10. Got some big-time recruits in that group. But, they're not going to compete for the East this year, but I think they get to at least 6, maybe even 7 wins.
Interesting. You're right. Florida, you should be able to do better than that. And, like I said, if they can't, there's problems there in Gainesville. Well, but no mention of Vanderbilt. I see. I even know that with their 5.
I had somebody tell me, a guy I know who coaches at Vanderbilt told me a couple weeks ago that AJ Swan has some glimpses of Jay Cutler in him. I said, well, dude, if he's Jay Cutler, then you guys better get to a bowl game this year. So,
yeah.
Look, they pulled off the upsets over Florida and Kentucky last year. Who knows? Can they get to 6 wins? Their schedule sets up very nice for them right out of the gates. Like, with all their non-conference games, I think they get Wake Forest. But, like, if they can win those, all you got to do, if you can go 4-0 in your non-conference, all you got to do is find 2 conference games again, which you just did last year, and that'll get you just 6-6. And if that happens, we may be talking about every team in the SEC becoming bowl eligible this year. So we'll see.
That'd be cool to see. I always like it when the SEC gets all the teams in bowls. And Chris, this has been fun having you on. I told you, 20, we went a little bit over that, but appreciate you taking the time. Where can people check you out, and where can they listen or watch Locked On SEC?
Yeah, Locked On SEC, wherever you get your podcasts. We got the video version up at YouTube now. We still got so much content we got from SEC Media Days. We'll still be cranking some of that out this week and next week with guests like Cole Kubelik, Jordan Rogers, Alyssa Lang, Dari Noka, Tony Barnhart, Mr. College Football, and our conversation with Greg Sankey, I think we're running tomorrow. So check that out, Locked On SEC.
All right, go check it out. And once again, Chris, I appreciate the time, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Yeah, man, anytime.